My name is Ida Rademacher. I co-lead the financial security program at the Aspen Institute, which is a sister program to the climate, energy, and environment program here. And I also lead out of the president's office a lot of the ambitious work of Aspen these days to think about strategic impact areas. Climate is one, and so is economy, inclusive economy. And this is the conversation where I like to think that we really do kind of lay down the gauntlet in some ways to say that when we become serious about the energy transition and what it's going to take, it's an opportunity to be even more intentional, ambitious about how that also helps us accelerate the kind of equity transition that leads to fundamentally different outcomes for households and communities, and an economy that has a lot more deeply shared prosperity. And so that is an aspiration. And there are some incredible leaders on the stage with me today who have some of the puzzle pieces that can bring us to what is one of many last mile problems, but the implementation of so much that's happening is going to be in that space. So that's the setup for sharing the wealth of the energy transition. But I just want to so I'm going to quickly say who's on stage and welcome them. And then before I actually ask them to say a little bit more about who they are and what they do, I'm going to ask a few of you to share why you are sitting in this particular place and what kind of questions you're hoping to hear before we ever get started, so we can index on that. And if we do this right, we will have a really great, lively conversation amongst ourselves and with you. We'll leave at least 20 minutes of that for Q&A and conversation. So looking forward to that. So just so you know who is up here, to my far right is Danielle Decatur, who is the Director of Environmental Justice at Microsoft. And then I've got Harold Pettigrew, who's the CEO of Opportunity Finance Network, which is about 400 plus community development financial institutions. See how I did that? I didn't just say CDFI, because not just a community development group. We have Mark Chambers, who's the Vice President of Elemental Energy, and Donnell Baird, who's the founder of Block Power. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for what you're doing every day. I would love to hear from 3 people in the audience, and I'm not sure who's got a mic, but we won't be able to hear you unless you speak into the mic, and this is being recorded. So I'd love to just hear briefly who you are and what kind of information you hope, not a lot about what you do, but what you hope to hear and learn from the group.
Hi, I'm Lizette Cooper. I'm on the management committee at Franklin Templeton and run stewardship and sustainability for one of their subsidiaries. And I'm super interested in financial structures and financial engineering that can help close the wealth gap. And so I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Thank you so much. Anybody who would like to model that and add to our understanding of who's in the audience, we'd love that. Hi.
Hi, my name is Griffin Peck. I'm a sustainability coordinator from rural West Central Minnesota. I'm trying to figure out how to make sure our local farmers are being able to share in the wealth of the energy transition while also trying to convince them that wind is the future and that if they don't want wind, their other option is a coal-fired power plant in our county. And, you know, I would much prefer a wind turbine to that. So yeah, I'm just trying to think about how we're engaging with our rural communities to really lift them up instead of continue extractive economies. Thanks.
Great. And then could we run over to the other side over here, and I think in the way back? Wow, that's really bright.
We can't see you, but
we can hear you.
Appreciate you.
Hi, I'm Sam with Sunshine City Solar in El Paso, Texas. We install residential rooftop solar systems. Our utility, it's a monopoly in town, El Paso Electric. They were bought by JP Morgan Chase's Infrastructure Investment Fund 3 years ago, and they're extracting huge dividends to their investors every year while punishing rooftop solar. In fact, although we're known as the Sun City, El Paso is now the worst city for installing rooftop solar because of the utility, and very interested in, you know, lobbying or what the most effective way to bring change with a utility like that would be.
Great. I see one more, and then we'll get into our pieces. I'm so glad we did this.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Eva Diaz. I am a resident here in Miami Beach. I'm very curious, as part of this community, to learn more about what this is that you have to teach us on transition of energies, and find out how we, as a community, can, play a more active role in that and help more.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ijiro Jenny. I'm with HR&A Advisors, a public policy advisory firm, urban planning. Right now, we are helping Rise, Light, and Power, and they are basically the owner of a fossil fuel site, and they want to transition it into like a hub for renewable energy. However, we're doing community engagement, and apart from just offering the community, these are going to be well-paying jobs that could scale up into something like family sustaining. We're just interested in exploring meaningful paths of ownership, particularly when it won't necessarily be community owned, but it's like privately owned. Is there any type of like recommendations, or even in your type of work, any type of examples where private is sharing power with the community?
I love where this is going. So glad we asked you. All right, great. Thank you. You guys got all that? Lots of things. We have a good index, and we'll have lots of time for conversation. So let's just go ahead and invite some introductions. I'm going to go from the middle out, like our economy should, and I'll go Harold, then I'll go Mark, then I'll go Danielle, then I'll go Donnell. Okay.
That was a great tee up. Go urban planners. Actually, I'm an urban planner by training. So hi everybody. In urban planning, just to give you a little bit more about me, it's basically a profession designed to figure out how systems should work for people, that live in them. Simply put. And so, coming into this work at OFN, Opportunity Finance Network, really it's been how do we help ensure that our network of financial institutions all across the country not only have the resources, but the infrastructure and assistance that they need to deploy capital into communities. OFN is nearly 40 years old as a network, bringing together now, as Ida mentioned, a little over 400 members across the country. And these are from loan funds to banks to credit unions to venture firms, green banks to minority depository institutions. You can name the type, and there's likely a type of member in our network. The long and short is that it's financial institutions committed to deploying capital with a specific focus on community. I often like to break down community development financial institution. The most important part of that is the CD. The anchor of that is the C. We exist at the intersection of capital and community. That's the purpose of why we're here. And so CDFIs across the country, I used to run one for 7 years before I joined OFN last year in last June. And it was a deep commitment to making sure that where our capital markets fail and making sure that in getting capital into communities, that CDFIs are at the gate, making sure that communities, by that meaning entrepreneurs, housing projects, childcare, you name the type of community investment. We have CDFIs all across the country that are not only ensuring that capital is flowing, but that communities aren't left behind.
And let me just, in the final kind of like setup for you, you have a pretty big annual conference. You made a pretty big declarative statement at the end of last year's convening. Maybe you could share that with the crowd.
Yeah, every year we hold, we're the convener of the industry. And last year we held our biggest, most ambitious conference. 2,200 people gathered together in Washington, D.C. And during my introductory keynote, I issued a call to action that over the next 5 years, all CDFIs become climate lenders. What does that mean? If you're a small business lending, that you continue small business lending, but that you also make greenhouse gas reduction your aim. If you're financing housing projects, you keep that. We need housing projects considering how unaffordable affordable housing is, but we make sure that we have a lens of greenhouse gas reduction. And so across all the asset classes, making sure that as an industry organization, that we issue the call to action and help our organization and members that are working in your communities all across the country, that they're also focused on this exact topic, making sure that climate now is an overlay for all of our work. Thank you for that honor.
Yeah, no, thank you. Mark.
Hey, everybody.
Great to be here. So Mark Chambers, I'm the Vice President of Partnerships for Elemental Accelerator. And so for those of you that don't know what Elemental is, we are a nonprofit climate investor. And we invest across the spectrum from energy to mobility to food and agriculture to buildings, nature-based solutions, like you name it. And I think it's important to kind of laser in for a second on the nonprofit part of it. I mean, one of the benefits of being, we've been in this space for over a decade and kind of one of the early nonprofit climate investors. The benefit of being a nonprofit in this space is like, yes, we want to allow for a lot of these companies that we're investing in to survive, to be able to bring their technology and their products and their services to market. But we also are mission driven and we are values driven, and it allows for us to be particularly intentional with how we work with companies to allow for them to also center, in addition to their product, in addition to their service, in addition to their process, a deep need to connect with the communities and populations that they're serving. And so being able to focus and have equity be a driver, have inclusivity be a driver, in addition to climate, is part of what makes Elemental particularly like powerful in this arena. And it's something that we've been building the capacity to do, again, for a long time. And I think it's also important because, kind of to the point I just started with, is that being able to make sure that everyone gets to participate fully in this great kind of generational clean energy transition, it doesn't happen by accident, right? It won't happen by accident. So it does require everyone to be really clear on the fact that you have to kind of push where possible to be able to make sure that everything is not just driven by the market, it's driven by people that have a vision for the future that allows for everyone to participate. That's kind of like what I do. Why I do it is, so I've spent the majority of my career working in climate policy. So I was on the climate team in the Biden-Harris White House for the first 2 years as a senior director for building emissions. Before that, I was the chief sustainability officer for New York City for about 5 years for Mayor de Blasio. Similar job before that for DC government. And so I say all that because that is important, because policy creates like these bookends. It creates this like corralling of where we need to go. But I'm also an architect, so shout out to architects and planners. And so I'm a three-dimensional problem solver, right? And I think that now is a time for problem creator. Well, I will say this: we designed our way into this problem, so we need to design our way out. So
Okay, well said.
And so I think that now is a time for doers, time for builders, time for people that are sleeve roller uppers, and to be able to kind of really get a lot of things done. So this organization particularly allows for me to kind of flex all those and like work with amazing people as well.
I just heard somebody coin the term the other day, makernomics. Like the maker movement applied, which I thought was cool. And I'm curious too, did you all work in the DC administration at the same time?
Yeah, you just said that. I wasn't sure.
So I worked for DC
Why not find
government.
out?
So for several mayors in DC. So for Mayor Bowser and before that Mayor Gray.
Sustainability.
So
You were small
overlapped with
business.
Mayor Gray. I was a small business director.
See,
Yeah.
connections abound.
Okay, all right.
All right, Danielle,
Yes,
why do you do what you do, and what do you do?
I love this question. I also love what Mark just said about sleeve roller upper. I'm going to add that to my email
it's
signature.
yours.
Yeah,
Sleeves are
that's-
literally rolled
I mean,
up.
do you see this? I mean, this is literally a sleeve rolled up. So let's get to work. So my job at Microsoft as Director of Environmental Justice is ensuring that how we meet our sustainability commitments includes co-benefits for under-resourced communities, because what we're looking at here is a remaking of an economy. So let's remake that economy in a way that creates equitable benefits for all. My company has a few voluntary commitments. So by 2030, we will be carbon negative, water positive, and zero waste. And then by 2050, we will have removed all of our historical emissions from our company's founding in 1975. One of our commitments under carbon negative is 100% renewable energy by 2025. And so when we started our environmental justice program, we started it within our renewable energy program. And when you look at the scale of corporate voluntary commitments, In 2023, that was 17 gigawatts of infrastructure, solar and wind primarily, that was enabled by the corporate power purchase agreement. So core to our strategy is leveraging that tool, that power purchase agreement, that offtake agreement, to incorporate those community co-benefits. And our program is designed in partnership with a network of environmental justice activists and community members and leaders of community-based organizations that have been doing this work for decades. So our role really is to listen and to amplify the solutions that are already in these communities.
Thank you so much. Donnell.
What's the question? Who am I?
Introduce yourself, and of all the ways that you could be working in the world, you've chosen this. So who are you? What do you do? Why do you do it?
Well, these architects messed everything up, the architects and the bankers, and so try to clean up that mess. Mark is a dear friend of mine and an inspirational leader. The policy that he's led in D.C. and in New York and in the White House are transformational, so don't let his humility fool you. I think he really has given all of us an opportunity to really, mitigate the climate crisis while closing the racial wealth gap, and I think it's up to us as to whether or not we're actually going to utilize the opportunity. Truth be told, I was a senior staffer for Obama on his first and second campaigns, and so I don't love DC, but I understand how it works, and it's an election year, and so there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of risk. Like, all this money can, in some ways, not necessarily get clawed back, but frozen. And it's not necessarily the highest priority that the money that's been budgeted for Justice 40 and low and moderate income communities, if the kind of chaos and confusion and inertia continues and that money actually doesn't get invested, it's not clear that it will ever be invested. And so I think as an audience, it's incumbent on us to really, when we head back to our home districts, really push and clamor and advocate to get that money out. That's something that is not happening whatsoever, and it must start happening really, really soon. I'm Donnell. I run a company called Block Power that I started 10 years ago. Full disclosure, Mark's company and Danielle's company are both investors.
Purchasing Power.
Harold, I just met you today, but I'll send some investment documents later on this afternoon. Square the circle. We green buildings. We green existing buildings focused in low and moderate income communities. Shorthand version is, we say you can turn a building into a Tesla. Not that we love everything that Elon Musk is doing, but everyone knows what a Tesla is. It's all electric. And the electric vehicle industry has figured out how to take fossil fuel engines out of vehicles and replace it with all electric, smart, modern engines. We can now do the same thing with all existing buildings. We can take all of the fossil fuel equipment for heating, for air conditioning, for hot water, for cooking. You can take that fossil fuel equipment out, replace it with smart, all electric equipment. And that's important because there's 125 million buildings in America, and they emit 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Of our total emissions. I think it's like 17% of greenhouse gas. What is it, Mark, do you know?
Somebody in the audience will fact check us later. Sure.
I have jet lag. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and yesterday morning. So there is no path to mitigating the climate crisis without retrofitting and greening these buildings. And someone's gonna have to go building to building and pull out the fossil fuel equipment, replace it with electric equipment, and then start to buy the clean electricity that Danielle and Microsoft and all the corporate folks are helping us to develop across the country. And so I am really excited to participate in this conversation today. I started out as a community organizer focused on trying to figure out how to create jobs and build wealth in low-income communities. I guess the last thing I should say is in New York, Mark had left for the White House, but Mayor de Blasio and then Mayor Adams decided that to lower the crime rate in New York City, which was spiking post-pandemic, and we had a huge spike in crime, subway crime. And New York makes a lot of money from tourism, and so the crime rate is bad for people who live there, but it's terrible for tourism. And so they decided to create a jobs program to basically the NYPD had a list of thousands of young people that they thought were at risk of participating in gang violence. So they gave us that list and were like, hey, would you be willing to kind of hire train and hire these young people for jobs. And we said, well, yeah, we'll do it as long as they're climate jobs, as long as they will reduce emissions. And so we created this program where we ended up training and hiring over 4,000 at-risk individuals, ex-offenders, ex-gang members, people in the shelter system, to do solar installation and EV installation and heat pump installation and management, electric vehicle charging, all the kind of green infrastructure that New York City needs. We were able to train up this new workforce to do. And began certifying them and placing them into jobs. But the real opportunity is, how do you start to buy construction companies and transition them to worker ownership, so that we not just employ these folks, right, but that they are owners. They are worker owners in their own firm and have the opportunity to build wealth from all of the green infrastructure policy that the Biden-Harris team has put in place, and all of the, the green infrastructure that corporate America is helping to finance. Like, how do we use this opportunity to build wealth through ownership? And I think that's come up in a couple of your questions so far.
I just wanted to add one little thing on this I think is important. So, like Donnell mentioned, the program in New York around hiring at-risk folks. So for climate jobs, and like one of the things you guys saw not that long ago was the Biden-Harris administration launching the Climate Corps, right? And so when we started at the White House, like that was like critical path. Absolutely gonna do this Climate Corps. Took 3 years, right? 3 years plus to be able to get that to be something. In that time, there are industrious and smart people like all of yourselves that are doing a lot of this work and showing that it's possible. So I just want to make sure that folks, like, there's a lot of time that is often spent waiting for the big thing to happen, waiting for the piece of governance or the policy or the implementation to be the answer. But in the interim, there are a lot of folks that can kind of take it upon themselves to figure out ways to implement exactly those same things with exactly the same metrics, and then show that it's possible a lot sooner.
So we're going to go there anyway. I think you guys get a great setup to the next question, which is a general question for each of you to take into it. But I think that the ability to build a muscle that helps us think simultaneously about mitigating climate risk and mitigating the risks of real deep fractions and disparities in community around agency, ownership, identity, belonging. Each of you have your own kind of like impact thesis around that. And it is something there, you're bilingual. Each of you are really kind of already fluent in thinking about those things simultaneously. Is there a particular story of work in a community or with a specific group that you can share that illustrates a point? And I would ideally, the other thing I'm trying to think is, to your point about we don't have to wait to start, that when we talk about these, they're not one-offs. They don't actually have to be the exception rather than the rule. So is there some animating use case that you each might share that maybe talks a little bit more about your own tools in the toolbox that might get people starting to think about, wherever you sit, what are the tools in your toolbox to start to connect these dots? I'm looking at you. Do you want to go first?
Sure.
You've rolled up your sleeves.
I mean,
You're
yeah,
ready.
They're permanently rolled, so
Okay.
yeah. Literally, I bought this jacket like this. Great. So in terms of a case study, I'll offer, so when I think about our theory of change with respect to this work, our role is a corporate buyer, right? So we're on the demand side. So what we're trying to do is send demand signals to the clean energy industry about what kind of product we want to buy. We don't want to just buy RECs, right? Renewable energy certificates. We want to buy high quality renewable energy that is additional. It adds new clean energy infrastructure to the grid, and it bakes in community co-benefits and has a really solid community engagement process from the very beginning of project development. And one of the demand signals that we sent was a 250 megawatt power purchase agreement with an African-American owned developer called Volt Energy Utility. And we actually wrote a paper with Gilbert Campbell, the founder and CEO of Volt, so you can check it out. But what we wanted to do in that paper is really, we even have contract language published in the appendix. And I don't think that my company had ever done that before. But The structure of that PPA, it includes one, supplier diversity. So throughout the supply chain of the project, there is a minimum % threshold for minority and women-owned businesses to be involved in that supply chain. So that's toward the economic inclusion, intergenerational wealth gap alleviation. And then the second part is habitat restoration on site, because healthy ecosystems is important, foundational for healthy communities. And then the third component is that the PPA includes a community fund. So this will be millions of dollars that are going directly to community-based organizations that are doing environmental justice work in communities. And one of the strong applications of those community funds is toward workforce development. So, because what we're trying to do is, even though as a corporate PPA off-taker, we are engaging with suppliers when the project's already pretty far along, but with the community funds, we can fund organizations that are working upstream to create those jobs. And we're talking all across all job classifications, right? Certainly, implementation jobs, but what we're looking for is, manager, owners of businesses that are truly diverse-led and can help us remake that economy.
Thank you. Do you want to go next?
Sure.
I mean, I hate going down. I never like to go down a line, but I'm just doing it right now. I'm doing it. Whatever. Okay.
Absolutely, and I'm where you sit is where you stand, and what I represent is, like I said, a industry of organizations across the country doing work in community. So right now we're all waiting. I'm sure with you all being here, you might be familiar with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, $27 billion worth of capital coming down from federal government to invest in communities. One important thing that we lobbied for, among other people, we're a nonprofit, that we advocated for with the administration. This is recorded. We'll edit that.
Informed and educated.
That's right, that we informed and educated the administration and members of Congress on was the need to lean on community lenders. Why is that important? What we do, and it's a couple points, threads that I'm gonna pull on from the discussion today. We do sit at this intersection of community development and being a financial institution. So it's important to understand the anchoring in community, but also being that translator, being able to not only think structurally through how we craft financial products and how we meet the needs that are in communities, so that capital is flowing. All of what we're trying to do, when you begin at the end of the day stripping away what we're talking about, often it's money. And how capital can help an entrepreneur to pursue, creating their dream of a small business, or that educator that wants to create a child care facility, or you name. It comes down to, do they have the capital and resources needed to achieve that particular dream? Now, CDFIs sit in this sort of space. That's going to be important as we move forward. Trust is central, because you have folks in community every day working with folks to try to understand, where are you coming into this? How can we get you to where you want to go? And for all of us, right? One of the most difficult topics to actually talk about, work on, or to have any sort of engagement with is money. And so, that was a pregnant pause there. I'm sorry for that.
No, it's okay.
So I'll just land the plane here. Yeah, so that's right, the dramatic effects.
Money.
That's right.
Money. Money.
So we have organizations, though, I mean, to be clear, right, and to crystallize this, we have organizations with balance sheets and budgets, at $1 million to encroaching on $1 billion. OFN is an organization, we manage over $1 billion in assets, right? And so, but it's like a rounding error for what we're talking about in terms of true capital management by a financial industry, right? So I want to talk about the scale, but also the foundations of what we do, and translating and making sure that capital is flowing. That's on a foundation of trust. And that, to me, is the most important thing, as we talk through the investments that are actually coming that are climate specifically related.
Yeah. I mean,
Can I just share one
yes.
quick thing that I've learned from our environmental justice collaborators is this, it sounds like pithy and like a catchphrase, but truly moving at the speed of trust.
I'm going to come back later because I'm going to get a story out of you one way or another today, like an actual, like, this landed in this zip code, and this person, I want those things too. I think we need to put the reality of these things on there. A use case that kind of puts out there a little bit more of a definitive way that this toolbox is getting constructed.
Yeah. So I got one for you. So in about 4 hours, I have to leave and get on a plane and go to New Orleans, right? Because, and this is like preview future attractions. So tomorrow we are launching an innovation challenge with Finance New Orleans, which is a wonderful kind of community-oriented lender. And it's tied a lot to the city of New Orleans. It's a housing challenge, kind of to build like resilient and affordable housing in New Orleans. It's not a giant challenge. It's a dozen sites or so. So, but that's not the point. The point is not scale. The point is how do we partner deeply and locally, intentionally, and how do we do that in a way that can be emblematic of what's necessary for everyone to be considering, right? And also for us as an organization, Elemental Accelerator, like how we partner really, really matters to us. And so we've been working with Finance New Orleans to figure out how can we build a top of this funnel to bring climate technology companies together, ones that kind of maybe innovative around construction, maybe innovative around assembly practices, workforce, internals to the houses as well, as far as like building operating systems, all of those things which are somewhat commonplace in a lot of ways, but assemble them, bring them together, and do that in a way in New Orleans where it's not extractive. A lot of people go to New Orleans because they have an idea about what they think is best for New Orleans. And so what we're trying to do is to be a true partner, to be able to allow for Finance New Orleans to kind of lead this process with our kind of help, expertise, but also to prioritize the engagement with the community meetings, like all the things that will allow for them to be able to be self-determinant in what happens, and for it not to end up with a product, an outcome that is not appropriate for the location, that it did not include people in the process, and ultimately doesn't kind of stand the test of time and efficacy. And so we're super excited about that. We're launching that innovation challenge tomorrow. Innovation challenges is another thing that Elemental Accelerator does really well. Like a lot of times for the past, it's been something like Microsoft or other folks would come to us and we run an innovation challenge to help bring the best and the brightest to solve a problem. But everyone is deserving of solutions, and so how we can partner, particularly with those that have a keen sense of people in place, is going to be really important, especially when this like federal sweepstakes really kind of like starts flowing. You're going to want to really be in a position where you've shown the work of having partnered particularly in overburdened communities, but places where you're actually learning as much as you're giving, so that we can actually make sure, again, everyone gets to fully participate from a capacity side and an outcome side in the future that we're building.
Love it. Love it. I know you're going to bring us home with a use case that shows, I think, probably also just the market potential, the size of the potential to solve two problems at once.
That's such a leading question.
I know. I know. I'm good at those.
So, I mean, I'll get technical because I think some of the questions that you guys asked in the intro deserve a technical answer in my view. So, I will talk about a project that Block Power is doing in LA. We're financing electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the entire city of LA. And the reason we're able to pull this off is because we have a corporate partner, and as Danielle described, in this case it's Uber, which sucks in a lot of ways. But it's not being recorded, right? They're a great partner. Thanks for the money. It's great. So Uber has an issue in that they need to have electric transportation across California in the next year or so, right? Like the California legislature has passed all these laws. Like we want Uber to be green. Same thing in New York City. And so Uber's got to green its fleet, right, of independent consultants who drive the vehicles that they own or lease. And so how do you do that? Well, a lot of the Uber drivers, they need to drive during the day. Like they can't stop and charge for 4 hours or 2 hours during the day, or wait in line for an hour and then charge for like they cannot lose money doing that. They need to charge at night while they're sleeping. So how do you do that? And so we actually had a bunch of affordable housing buildings and apartment complexes throughout the city of LA sign up with the city government saying, look, if we don't have to pay anything, we're happy to host EV infrastructure in our parking lots, on our property. And some percentage of our tenants drive for Uber on occasion and Lyft, and so they'll be able to charge up at night while they're sleeping, right? So how do you finance that? How do you get that done? And how do you do it in a way that can build wealth, not just for ourselves and our investors, but for the local construction company and installers and the developers? And so we spent 5 years working with Goldman, and Danielle's rolling her eyes because she's like, Danelle, hurry up with more projects. But it took us a really long time to work with Goldman to figure out how to build a new financing tool that would allow for the kind of solutions that I think you guys are looking for. And so we actually ended up studying the mortgage bond market. And so if you set up a holding company that owns a set of distributed clean energy assets, like literally owns equipment in buildings, or owns electric vehicle charging stations, or owns solar panels, or own the new roofs underneath the solar panels, right? Like all of those capital expenditures can be owned by a holding company in a portfolio of assets that are owned in this holding company. And so who owns that holding company, right?
That's the question.
And so in the model that we've worked out with Goldman, our company owns some, Goldman owns some, but the community can be allocated some as well, right? And so whether it's the Uber drivers themselves or the landlords who rent apartments to them, or a church or a synagogue that's leasing out their parking lot, they can be giving an ownership stake, like literal stock, right? Equity in terms of like Wall Street equity, not just social justice equity in these holding companies. And so as the clean energy equipment is paid for over time by the users of that equipment, as Uber drivers pull up and charge up and pay a fee, all that revenue gets distributed to us, to our lenders at Goldman and Microsoft and other places. But also, as the value of that portfolio of clean energy assets rise, those guys should be able to build wealth, right? So the use of that kind of mortgage bond, like unsecure, unsecure, uncollateralized use of debt and mix of project equity can allow for some of the wealth building that I think you guys are kind of pushing towards. And then someone talked about rural. You're from central west Minnesota. I don't know if you guys have rural electric co-ops out there, but similar model where you have a nonprofit entity in that instance that owns the energy assets, and the community has a cooperative that kind of owns and governs it. And so you can have a for-profit version of that generates financial returns, that pays off investors for debt, and the equity is owned by a range of stakeholders, including community residents or workers or worker owners. And those kinds of models are what we have pioneered over the last couple of years, and that's how we're doing LA, and that's how we're doing a bunch of other projects in the 40 cities that we're in.
I'm so excited. I'm gonna limit myself to one question and no editorializing. And people that are here from my team know how hard that is for me. I just really want to say 1,000 things that I'm not going to. So I'm going to put on the skeptic hat. Can you see it? It's like rolling up the skeptic hat. I don't know what the equivalent of the sleeve roller upper is, but the skeptic hat wearer. I don't know. And that is just going to say it's already complicated, right? Like when I think about what we have to overcome, it's already complicated just to implement an all of LA process, right? And yet you went an extra step. You're thinking hard about the end. We often would think about it used to be, we don't use these words anymore, the E and the S, right, of an ESG. It kind of turns out it kind of all just goes to G. like what's the governance? What's the ownership stake? What's the incentive pieces? But I'm curious what you might say to somebody who says, because you have to move at the speed of trust, and because there aren't a lot of aligned places yet, how are you ever going to get this done? How are you going to overcome the complexity of solving for equity and an energy transition simultaneously? I just, if I'm a believer, but if I wasn't, and I was really asking that question for real, how do we get our answer to feel as compelling as possible? And what do we need to own about that complexity, where we might still be lacking tools or partners? That's a little bit convoluted, but I'm just wondering, and any thoughts you have about that, about overcoming that that complexity problem.
I mean, I'll just add one piece in this, and I'm not sure it fully answers it, but I mean, part of it is, again, if you trust is earned, right? So part of it is that you have to initiate your engagement in a way that suggests the fact that you are trustworthy. One of the things that we're excited about at Elemental is that we've been working with something. So typically, a lot of times when you're doing equity, you might do a financial tool called a SAFE, and so it's just like you're giving people money, and you're going to have a percentage of that company going forward. And that's great. That's how people usually give money and take equity. But we put out a product that's called like a development safe. And basically what it says is that, hey, we're going to give you a company money, and you have a choice. Your discretion. You want to pay it back, pay it back. If you don't, then you can actually take that as equity going forward. But it gives that flexibility to say that we are not trying to be extractive to you. We are trying to help you survive. And so that level of originating trust from the point of view of the lender does a lot to allow for a company to be like, hey, I might get my game together a little bit quicker, and then maybe I want to pay this back and hold on to the equity of my company. And so if that company is founded by a traditionally excluded founder, or that company is rooted in a particular place that is that needs that privatized or even nonprofit ownership of a co-op or of an energy provider, all of those things are benefited by people providing as much flexibility as possible for them to thrive.
In my documents, do you guys put that in there?
It's not. It is not. It is not. It's new.
I have
It's
some
brand new.
work with you and Harold after this conference.
It's fresh.
Okay. I'll complexify it further. I mean, I'm black, so I can get away with this. A lot of people in the environmental justice community or in communities of color who've been historically disenfranchised, disempowered. There can be a culture of opposition to many new things because we've been screwed over so many times, right? And so, here we come in talking about this new financial product, and someone's like, well, that kind of looks and feels like a subprime mortgage bond. That collapsed our community and gutted black wealth. We don't want to deal with that. That sounds risky and reckless. Or you'll run into places where folks, oppose windmills or large solar farms because they're not comfortable with it. They don't trust the science. It reminds them of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment where we got experimented on first with disastrous results. And so there is work on both sides to develop the new muscles that are required. It's not just benevolent investors and corporations. There's work to do on the citizenship side because owning equity and owning infrastructure comes with responsibilities and legal liabilities. There's all sorts of stuff that comes along with it, right? With governance, there's a whole host of things that come along, and there needs to be training and education. And so, why is it worth doing? There just isn't a path to get to a national clean energy infrastructure without distributed ownership. There just aren't enough transmission lines for the fossil fuel system. We can try to invest billions and billions of dollars in new fossil fuel equipment, but we as energy users pay into that when we pay our fossil fuel utilities. So we're still kind of owners of a publicly regulated fossil fuel infrastructure system. So there just isn't it's not that Uber is nice. They're not. They're here because there isn't another way for them to get electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the city of LA. You can't put EV infrastructure in the city of LA unless you have a huge constituency and a huge political constituency and then a huge set of parking lots. And how do you acquire those parking lots? And who pays for the education and the legal contracts to sign up all of those parking lots for Uber, right? That has a real cost. And so part of what we're saying is that cost, we're gonna allow the value that communities bring to the table to be quantified in our financial projections that we take into Harold's banks, right? And we're going to say this is our customer acquisition cost, or our EV, site development cost, or our project development cost, and these are real marketing and sales costs and project development costs that we all have as part of our pre-development, and that has a monetary value that can be loaned against and borrowed against and all that kind of stuff. And so, how can you distribute pieces of that to the community? They deserve it, right? And it's hard to do the project without it. We're just giving them access to what they should have had in the first place. And so I think it's a different way of thinking about it than the premise of like, oh, you're adding complexity to EVs by trying to add community ownership. No. It's easier to recruit 1,000 apartment complexes in LA if it's like you guys are going to own a piece of this
right.
EV charging network.
Yeah.
So I
Build
think
some
that maybe that's the thing. It's the inverting of the question
Yeah.
in some ways. Do you want to add to that, and then I'll go to the questions out here.
Yeah, I think there's a real risk of us not achieving our goals if we don't include communities and
That's right.
and partner with them with meaningful co-benefits. I mean, there are a number of examples I could cite of projects that have been tanked by community opposition. Recently, there was in the Osage Nation in Oklahoma an operational wind farm that now the Osage Nation is demanding being torn down at a cost of $300 million to the developer that built it. That's just one example of many. So, with corporates like Microsoft, like we are investing in those clean energy infrastructure projects to meet our goals. And we have our own infrastructure. We have data centers. We can only operate in communities where they give us the license to operate. So there's real business risk on the table.
The developer would have been far better off being like, here's $100 million, Osage Nation, in this project, right? They would have made more money if they'd done it that way.
I feel like the constant tension we're living with right now is the fundamental urgency of moving quickly and the history and lack of muscle, knowledge, trust in those spaces,
That's right.
and how can we move that along faster, more differently, and maybe it is flipping it from this is too complex to there is no actual alternative to doing this the right way this time, or in a way that considers these things together. Anyway, we're not going to answer all your questions today, and I'm just going to keep asking more, but no, I'm kidding. You want to say one thing, but I want to start to raise some hands so that we can see a microphone runner. So we're going to do a question here, and you asked the first question, so you don't get this one, but the person beside you does. So we'll go here, here, and here, and then Robin will get the last one because I see her and she's really smart and I want to hear her questions. So did you see the right over? Who was the first? Yeah, the young lady right there. Go ahead and give it to her.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Sachi Graber. I do a lot of work with an organization called Cooperative Energy Futures in Minnesota, which is a member-owned co-op that builds community-owned solar gardens. And we run into, in Minnesota and elsewhere, a lot of problems with some of the puzzle pieces that you're describing. Community ownership is just one, right? Where you start talking to low-income Black and Brown communities, and they don't trust energy providers. And then you try to go to a bank and you say, well, this is owned by the community, that it's owned by our community of people of color. And the bank says, absolutely not. Like, where is this model coming from? Who are your, why would we invest in this? And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to this massive transition we're seeing as we actually try to think about building wealth, not only for small community-owned companies, but as we talk about building wealth for the community. What tools do we have there, and what gaps still exist for us to kind of get to this state where everybody can be owning a piece of these technologies?
I'm going to take two questions. Well, you answer that one while we bring it over there. Let's take one answer, and then we'll roll it into hearing the others as well.
There were a couple challenges you mentioned in that. I'll address the capital issue specifically for Minneapolis. There's an organization called Shared Cooperative Capital that's in Minneapolis, and they focus specifically on community ownership models in terms of providing capital to actually support. And there's organizations across the CDFIs across the country that are investing more. Before coming to OFN, before the pandemic, I was raising a practice focused on worker ownership from a small business standpoint in Washington, D.C. And so there are more organizations that are looking to provide financial alternatives and new financial tools being developed by different organizations actually to capitalize different worker ownership type structures.
I think you bring up a great point. Just every single part of that conversation you just talked about has a lack of knowledge, therefore a lack of ability to understand how to price risk with a certain component of that issue. And so what are the shared tables, which is going to be a part of the de-risking conversation there. There's a question right over here.
Thank you so much. My name is Atharv. I'm one of the Future Climate Fellows here at the Aspen Institute. A lot of the conversation today has been rightly focused on sharing the wealth in communities where such projects are situated. But what I'm curious about is the communities that often end up missing out on this wealth is the communities that are very necessary in building out these projects through sourcing of raw materials or providing labor to build out these projects, but are not necessarily providing the land where these projects are developed. So how can both financial institutions as well as private corporations ensure that that side of the value chain is also factored into the conversation when we're talking about sharing wealth in this transition?
Well,
Let's go to 2 answers, and we've got about 7 minutes left, so just flagging that.
No, it was a corporate question.
I am the corporate person. Okay. Okay, so I'll share an example from the structure I mentioned for Volt Energy Utility PPA that we did. Similar structure we did with Sol Systems, which is a developer based in DC. We signed a PPA for 500 megawatts of solar with them. And those projects will be in multiple states. And 2 different RTOs, if you're familiar with the energy grid in the US, both PJM and MISO. And so in the context of the community fund that we're contemplating, when we issued that announcement, the number was $50 million of community funds. That money, we consider the beneficiaries of that money to be not just in the communities where, because that's farmland essentially, and those community members certainly should benefit and have environmental justice issues. But we also are dispersing those funds in the urban areas in those RTOs as well. So the first tranche, if you will, of community funds, about $1 million, went to Baltimore and Washington, D.C. organizations. I'll just name one, Some So Others Might Eat, which is a fantastic organization in DC. And then a lot of the focus of that funding was on workforce development. In the next tranche of projects, we are now looking to Illinois and to the rural communities there. And the Sol Systems team has done a great job of community outreach and really figuring out what are the EJ issues in those locations and who are the folks that are already working on solutions and how can we get money to them as well.
I want to go back to the question for Minnesota because I don't want to screw around with you. And time is short in terms of the climate crisis and the politics this year. And so, look, I mean, to Danielle's point, right? Like, again, like going out and educating the community members and talking to them about solar and wind power and all this stuff, like, is expensive. Like, it has a cost to run the campaign, to do the PR. Like, structuring community ownership models is expensive in terms of like the $1,000 an hour lawyers that you have to pay and the lobbyists that you have to pay to like clear it under the tax code or with the SEC or like whatever. And so like it is real money. You know, in the upfront costs, and so I do want to speak to that. And the way that we have done it is we have gone out and raised venture capital, and God bless our investors because we went to them and said like, here's what we're going to use your money for, and it is a non-traditional investment on their part to allow us to invest in that kind of pre-project legal, mechanical, and electrical engineering, financial costs in order to have the opportunity to develop a project to where we can aggregate enough farms to be large enough for Microsoft to do the 250 megawatt power purchase agreement with us, right? Like that takes a lot of heavy lifting, right? And so that is what we had to do. And so perhaps there are community foundations, but the truth of the matter is Mark and the team in the White House put $100 billion into the IRA for this. It is not easy to go and get it, but it is there. So I think my message is this stuff is not easy, but it is possible, and it is probably the only real path or shot that we have. And if we miss it, we may not have another chance to go through this kind of window for decades, right?
And I'm mindful of our time, which is not the nice. This is not a nice part. The reality is, this is a test. This is really the first time at Aspen Climate that we've started to intentionally try to bring these pieces together. I mean, this last mile problem is like everything is about how capital actually lands these projects in household budgets, in community resilience, and these pieces here. So there is going to be more. We'd love to hear what kind of conversations, what kinds of playbooks. Look, this whole thing is an experiment of how does Aspen use its platform to help accelerate your leadership and put a spotlight on it, or do whatever we can with the tools we have. We want to hear about that. I want you to find our innovators up here in offline conversations. I want to give them the last word, closing across here today. And I don't even have a question for you on that, but I would love to go ahead and with our last 2 minutes, just like a 30-second from each of you, if there's something else you want to say about what you want to leave people with here today.
We need all of these pieces to work together so that we can survive. And that to me is the ultimate point that we're really talking about, right? Like, it's money flowing and those sort of things. There'll be opportunities and all those things. But what we're really talking about is our own survivability as people. And so whether it's corporations or asset owners or allocators or whoever you might be or from a community standpoint, right? Like, that's the depths at which, at least for me coming into this, that like we're not talking about, okay, well, let's create like some new opportunity for folks to take advantage. We're talking about our own survivability, right? And so throwing everything that you have wherever you sit, professionally and personally, to me is the charge. That's the urgency around it. And then making sure that we're bringing that level of focus to this, wherever you sit along the professional spectrum.
It's giving me a whole new walk-on song for you. I'll tell you later what it is. It's okay. Yeah. Mark.
So no one gets to sit on the sidelines. You're not here because you're the kind of people that do that, clearly. But I think that for us to hang out as a species a little bit longer, to what Harold's saying, it does require the bending of your skill sets, your kind of expertise, your effort, your like sweat into this work. And I think that for you guys that come here, there's a tendency to kind of feel good in the moment about like learning some things, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna go like try this thing out next week and do whatever, and that's great, whatever. But I do think that the urgency and like the zeitgeist of where we are right now does require a slightly deeper commitment. Like, it requires you to be, a bit more of like advocate is not really the right word. Like, you need to be an activist for this. And so I think that the challenge I have for you is to figure out how are you an activist for this work in a way that's not just convenient to you, but in a way that allows for you to do whatever your superpower is that you do well, and to do that in a way that's a little bit more supercharged. I do think that this is a time for us to like rethink like the value proposition of how we're contributing to the society. And so I think that for all of you, it's just like dig a little deeper is my challenge to you, and figure out how you can take the pieces of this that really matter to you, and that's connecting this work to the populations that you serve and you're a part of. Then there's a way to do that more intentionally.
My professional background is in organizational change management. And what I'm seeing at this conference as the theme is we have all the technical solutions that we need. What are the barriers? Process, policy. But what's really behind that is people, right? And change is biologically difficult for humans. We are wired that way because we are scanning, our ancestors were scanning the environment for threats. And what is a threat? An anomaly. What's different, right? So what I do in my job every day is to take something that is different, but make it look like something that people already know. So we always talk about innovation. Innovation's cool, right? But it can be threatening. So I encourage you to take whatever tools you have, look at your stakeholders you need to influence, and figure out what do they care about, What do they find familiar and warm and cuddly? Cuzzy is cuddly and cozy combined. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah.
It's innovation. Innovation.
I'll leave it at that.
Word. Dana.
That's great. Oh yeah, I'll just say quickly an example for that for us. When we are crazy enough to sign a contract saying that we're going to take a whole city to net zero by 2030, and we've signed 3 of them, which is crazy. We don't talk to people about climate when we go door to door because it is scary, right? It's not cuzzy, it's scary, and what we do talk to them is like, hey, Stanford and Harvard just came out with these studies that all the fossil fuel equipment in your home leaks methane when you and your kids are sleeping. It leaks nitrogen dioxide. It leaks benzene, which is going to give you guys cancer. Like, you're poisoning your kids. And, oh, by the way, if you replace it, like, it'll also be good for the planet and maybe you'll save some money. But, like, right now you're poisoning your kids, and that's not us. That's, like, Stanford, right? And so then instead of talking about climate change, which it is hard for us to really process and deal with, and it's like, no, my children are sleeping and they're breathing in methane, and I just can't have that, right? So trying to figure out how to do what Danielle suggested and situate some of these conversations inside what people already know and is already close to their heart, I think is a really important tactic.
Please join me in thanking our panel.
Thanks.